Good afternoon, Dodie. It's good evening here.
Good afternoon. Good evening.
In our conversations in the early stages, thank you for agreeing to actually carry this out.
Of course. Yes. Am I speaking with Dennis? I'm
You are?
looking at it.
I should have introduced yourself at the beginning, yeah.
Yes. Hi, Dennis. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for asking me. I'm very honored to get to speak to your group tonight.
Could you just very quickly fill in the other guys here? Because you've been on some little travels around the.
Yes. I just returned from the Okie-Tex Star Party, which is held in the Panhandle of Oklahoma, right up there where Oklahoma, Texas, and Colorado come together.
Right.
Up on the Black Mesa, about almost 5,000 feet elevation, high desert, very dry, Bortle 1 skies, and very clear.
Okay. Not quite like here at the moment.
Not very similar, I'm sure.
Did you meet Bob?
Thank you very much. Yes, Dennis, when you texted me to ask me if I would speak, I really had no hesitation about that because I I used to get to do a lot of public outreach when we lived in Dallas, star parties there on pretty much a weekly or biweekly basis. And I missed that interaction. I missed that chance to talk with people about astronomy. And looked at your Facebook page, and you all have just such a very nice group there. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. And I am sure I will learn a lot from you guys as well. So this is a photograph taken actually in New Mexico. Um, just a little Milky Way shot that I like to start with. I have my husband Eugene here in case I have any technical difficulties. So a little bit about me. 2015, I was looking for a place to watch the Perseids meteor shower and sort of fell down a rabbit hole from there. That's when I found the club that I belong to in Dallas. I do not come from a technical background, which I think gives me a disadvantage over the engineers, uh, uh, because I have to really work at the technical aspect of this. I'm very active in my club's astrophotography subgroup, which is akin to your group here. And I did have the chance to serve as president of our club in Dallas before we moved. I'm married to Eugene, who's my tech support, and he calls himself my Sherpa to carry my equipment. And I have two small grandsons. And we have, 3 years ago, we moved from the Dallas area, which was, of course, Bortle 8, Bortle 9. And now I have a backyard, Bortle 4. So when we were looking at houses, everyone was saying, here's the kitchen, here's the living area. And I was saying, yes, 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 but show me the backyard. I need to see, can I see some sky from here? So the club I belong to in Dallas, which I'm still very much a member of, is one of the largest in the country. And the only reason I mention this is because to me, the club is just so important for trying to do something like astrophotography. We have a great dark site, 36 acres with a bunkhouse and electricity. For me, the most important thing is we have this astrophotography subgroup, and we meet on Zoom about 3 times a month. Some of that's general, and some of it is specific to processing. And I used to have the job as vice president of getting speakers. And during COVID, we learned that we could use Zoom and had some really top tier speakers that I've listed there. So this evening, I'd like to talk about two really good pieces of advice that I received when I was first starting out in this hobby. A little bit about equipment, visual versus astrophotography, show you some of my photos, talk about software, and a little bit about processing and resources. And feel free to ask me any questions as you go along. I prefer it be more of a conversation. So the first really good piece of advice was only add one new thing at a time. In other words, if you're starting out in the hobby, don't think like I did at the beginning that everything has to be perfect. You can't take a picture unless you're guiding, unless you're perfectly focused. Just add one thing at a time. Get used to that thing and then go on to the next improvement. And then the other thing was to just start taking pictures and see what you get, and don't worry about it being perfect the first time, because it won't be, as I'll show you when I show you my first photo. So when I first started in this, almost everyone was a visual observer, especially women. By the way, do you all have any women in your astrophotography subgroup? Or primarily men, would you say?
Yeah.
Yes, you do?
We do.
That's great. I'm still very much in the minority here, being a woman in this hobby. On observing, it's a lot of women too, but astrophotography, not so much. Observers here, know the sky usually better than the imagers, but I started out as an observer, and so I feel like I learned a little bit about the sky early on. I've done some of the Astronomical League Messier observing program objects. I've done a lot of that. But what really got me started in astrophotography was I was in a meeting one day, like you guys are right now, and someone showed me a photo of Jupiter that they took with their 8-inch SCT. And I had an 8-inch SCT, and I said, wait a minute, I can do that? So at that point, they introduced me to a man named George Hall. And George Hall became famous because one of his Jupiter videos, probably about a 3-minute video, captured an impact of a comet or asteroid on Jupiter, and NASA saw it on his website. So George loaned me a little camera like this, a little planetary camera, and I put it in this telescope. Oh, let me show you that. He loaned me one of these, and I put it in my 8-inch telescope and started taking planetary images. And this was my first Saturn image. I would say my first kind of good Saturn image. And then from there, I started taking an occasional, I think we had a good year. It was maybe 2018 for Mars, when Mars was pretty much at opposition. And so I learned how to use fire capture for doing the videos, how to stack in auto stacker, and use Registacks to fine tune it. So, but before we leave the solar system, I wanted to show you this photo. This was taken on the way back from a star party a few years ago. That was the only star we saw all week at that star party. It was, star party was Okie-Tex, but that year we called it Soakie-Tex because we had rain, sleet, snow, and hail. But I did see the sun one night in a nice sunset. But I wanted to show you that because it gives you a good idea about what our sky looks like here. We have large expanses of wide open sky, unobstructed views. And then one more on the planetary side. The conjunction a couple of years ago, 4 years ago, of Jupiter and Saturn. And we were up on top of a hill, and I was able to take this with my 8-inch telescope, which was pretty thrilling. So from there, eventually, you get tired of planetary and you want something a little more interesting. So we were at a star party in West Texas, and I acquired this giant mount, this CGM DX. I just had my 8-inch scope with me that week, and I was interested in getting into deep sky imaging. And one of the men on the field was very taken with the idea of a woman wanting to do deep sky astrophotography. And he was introducing me to all the imagers up and down the field. And at the end of the week, he said to my husband, "Eugene, do you have $1?" And he said, "Sure," handed him $1, thinking he needed some change. And he said, "I want a new mount. And I can't buy a new mount until I can tell my wife I've sold my old one," which was a year old. So I'd like Dodie to have this mount so she can do some deep sky astrophotography. And he was serious. So it was the star party, and we loaded it in my car, and that's what I used. So yes. The head alone, the mount alone weighed 42 pounds. The tripod weighed 50 pounds. So I had to have a big refractor. So I bought this 127 Explore Scientific to put on top of it. And I got this William Optics for to use as a guide scope, knowing I could use it for some wide field imaging as well. So a rabbit hole, like I say. But there you go. So here's that first image I was telling you about. This is about an hour's worth of imaging from a friend's driveway, and I literally jumped up and down when I saw the images coming in on my DSLR. And then not too soon after that, I followed Trevor Jones's video on backyard astrophotography, doing 1-minute exposures for 2 hours, and got this image at our club's website. So I was hooked. Right? So I'm just going to show you a couple more of those early images I took with my DSLR. So Rosette, the Pleiades. Most of these are from our club's dark side in Oklahoma. Whirlpool, of course, the needle. And then I decided it was time to go ahead and take the leap into an astronomy, a cooled camera. So I got the ASI 1600, which I'm still using. That thing is a workhorse, and it cools down more quickly than the newer versions like the 2600. Even in the heat of the summer here, and our high today was 98, which is about 36 degrees Celsius. And it's October. So we have some serious summer weather here, but I can still cool that thing down to -10 in the heat of the summer pretty reliably. This is my first narrow band image taken from Dallas in the city. This is about 5.5 hours of SHO on the big mount. And it was, as I recall, the dead of winter. It was quite cold. It's centered on this super bright triple star Struve 2816, and taken with my 127. Another one, Pinwheel, got that one early on. This is just 1 hour of LRGB, again with the 1600 and the 127 millimeter. And then the Helix Nebula, just about 2.5 hours on that from the backyard. So about this time, decided, they're coming out with these new lighter weight harmonic drive mounts. So about going on 2 years ago, I got the ZWO AM5, and I think Steve, you have one of these. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. How do you like it?
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great. It's so portable, compared to the CGM DX. It's just a dream. And what I did was I took this tripod from I had an AVX also, and I took the tripod off of it and refitted it to the AM5 with this pier extension, so that with this long tube, I wouldn't be hitting the tripod till I got really, I don't hit it until I get straight up. And with these harmonic drives, you do not want to hit the tripod leg with your camera, because the torque it will just rip things apart. So this is in our backyard right now. This is kind of my setup here. Got pretty much a wide open sky. That's my 127. I don't have to have this counterweight on here, but that's kind of my belt and suspenders approach to avoiding any problems. When we go to the big week-long star parties out west, I do I nail these legs into the ground. Eugene ties some rope around it, and we use these 10 to 12-inch nails and pound those into the hard rock soil, because we get these high winds and dust devils that come through the field and just take out telescopes, almost every one. But so far, so good. This is the little Z61 William Optics that I mentioned that I use for wide field. And this is a picture of our backyard with my little setup there. So you can kind of see I have some trees over to the west, but it has not been a problem. Pretty much wide open sky. I'm going to show you just a few of my more recent photos. Of course, North American Nebula with the wall there. This is just 2 hours of LRGB with the 127. This is the Iris Nebula. This is 9.5 hours of LRGB with the 127. Again, this is from our backyard, Bortle 4 skies. Lots of dust in there, right? And of course, the Eagle. Up until a few days ago, this was the longest exposure time I had processed. This is 15 hours of hydrogen, sulfur, and oxygen. And I ended up doing an OHS combination on this to get the colors that I wanted. And of course, that's with the 127 and the 1600. And the Trifid and the Lagoon. This is just 2.5 hours. This is one-shot color. I also have a ZWO 2600 color, which I really haven't used that much. I need to try some of the new dual band filters. Now you notice my framing here is a little wonky, right? I mean, why didn't I have this pushed over to the right a little bit? you know. A lot of people combine astronomy with cats. Here in Texas, we combine astronomy with bourbon. And I think that night, there was a little bourbon involved. And I also found out after I took these images that I had just taken them too nice before. So, but it's still fun. It's a fun one to do because they're both so bright. And that's about 2.5 hours. Pleiades, this is 8.5 hours of RGB on the Pleiades from our backyard. I've done it a few times before, but I really wanted to get more of the dust back there this time. And of course, this is M27, 4.5 hours of RGB. Getting into some of the dark nebulas, this one, the Swan Nebula, I found particularly interesting. At first, I thought over to the right that was a gradient, but it's actually just what's right there in the Milky Way. This is with the one-shot color camera, 2 hours from the backyard. And this is with the little Z61. That is a fine telescope. The stars are always just pinpoint. Of course, the Heart Nebula. This was actually taken out in West Texas in a town called El Dorado, where there's a big star party every year. Where I obtained that mount. This is 4 hours of one-shot color. And then if you do the heart, you have to do the soul, right? 5.25 hours on this one. A lot of people like to really reduce the stars, to the point where there just almost aren't any. And I tend to leave them in. I do use BlurX to sort of bring them down a little bit and correct any aberrations around the corners. But basically, I like to leave them in. Just personal choice. And this has become one of my favorites. This is the Ghost Nebula M78. 9.5 hours of RGB on this one. I like the little bit of extra resolution that I get using the mono camera. I think it's why I tend to keep going back to that one. And this is Bode's Nebula, M81 and M82, also from the backyard. 9 hours. I used to, when I first started, I would do 2 hours on everything, unless clouds came in and I could only get an hour or so. But I found it's much more satisfying just to focus on something for as many nights as I can until I get, 6, 8, 10 hours or more. And then this is from a star party out in West Texas, just down the road from McDonald Observatory. 7 hours of RGB data. It was June. Never go to West Texas after May, is all I can say. It was unbelievably hot. And this is one I just finished yesterday. This is from the Okie-Tex Star Party. What I did there was I picked 2 objects, this one and the next one that I'll show you. And I just imaged both of those all week, all night long, all week. We had 3 or 4 nights of high winds. And by high, I mean between 15 and 17 mile an hour sustained winds with gusts 25, 30 mile an hour on top of that. So for 2 nights, I did an image. And then on the third night, I said, you know what? If I have to sit out there and hold on to those tripod legs, I'm going to collect some data because the skies were so clear and so dark. So, so I did, and I got 17 and a half hours of hydrogen and RGB on this with, of course, my 127 and the 1600. And this was one where I had to learn how to incorporate that hydrogen. You all probably already know this, but it was news to me that when you collect hydrogen data, it's not pure. There's a continuum there where the red, especially with hydrogen, is also included in that bandwidth that we isolate, even with a 3 nanometer filter, and mine are 7. So what you have to do is go in and use a process called continuum subtraction. And it used to be pretty difficult to use, and now it's been improved. It's a SETI Astro script, and it effectively and very quickly removes everything but the hydrogen. So you get a pure hydrogen signal, which you then combine with your RGB. And that's the result there. And then this next one is the other one that I worked on in Okie-Tex. And this is the Lacerta Nebula in the constellation Lacerta. This is 16 and a half or 18 and a half hours of hydrogen and RGB with the 1600 camera and the Explore Scientific 127. You need a lot of data on this one. It's called a bright nebula. I don't see where it's bright because each individual frame, you could see almost nothing but stars. Even the hydrogen, I do 5 minutes on hydrogen, it was still quite dim. And again, I did the continuum subtraction on this one. Otherwise, all you would see would be red. I think the hydrogen, I think I have like 5 hours of hydrogen, and then the rest is RGB. Just a little quick discussion about equipment. I recently added this to my setup. So is anyone there using a mini PC so you can image remotely from your house? Yeah? Okay. This was a game changer for me, especially going to the star parties or when it's really hot here. It's been a great help to me. I use the ZWO guide camera. I use a Pegasus Advanced Power Box for distribution and everything else. I have an 80 millimeter refractor, and I have never used it. I've added an autofocuser, but I don't have any images here showing that. As far as software, we probably all started with Backyard Nikon and Deep Sky Stacker and GIMP. Of course, Nina, Nina is just the way to go, I think, these days. A lot of people are using other programs, and I personally don't have any knowledge of those. And of course, PhD2 for guiding and PixInsight. So some things that I love about Nina. Are you all Nina users? Or
Yeah. So
yeah. What other capture? What other capture programs do you all use?
Shortcut and
Okay.
And
Mhm.
that's why I brought sequence generator I use.
Okay. Okay. Um, I like Nina because it works well with the ZWO products that I use, my mount, my cameras. Also works very well with PhD too. Um, Works with my Pegasus products. I use a Pegasus flat panel and in addition to the power box. It has a great autofocus program in it. It has a really nice 3-point polar alignment. It saves you a lot of time. It has a nice flats wizard. It's really just once you've got it set up, you just tell it which flats you want, and boom, there it goes. And I like the advanced sequences, which I'm still figuring out how to totally automate all that. But the plate solving alone, and Nina's free, of course, but they could charge whatever they want just for the good plate solving in Nina. It really does a nice job of that. Meridian flips, camera cooling, everything, and that you can incorporate into the sequences. Hold on. And I do use PixInsight exclusively. Are there any PixInsight users in the room? Okay. Would you agree that it's massively complex?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. It's expensive,
Yep.
right? Especially when you're looking at the add-ons like BlurX, StarX, NoiseX. And there's always an update, right? I feel like every time I open it up, it's updates. But it's all good stuff because unless they have an update where it's one problem after another, it's things that make things easier for us. It is my software of choice. So my personal approach is lots of integration time. And of course, this becomes more important when our skies aren't as good as we want them to be, right? Try to get a minimum of 2 hours on each narrowband channel, ideally 4. A minimum of 1 hour on each RGB channel, ideally 3 or 4 is ideal. And I do collect separate data for my stars. Is anyone else taking that approach?
Yeah.
Yeah. 30, I use 60-second exposures. I process those separately, and it seems to produce better stars in the final image. For narrowband, I use 300 seconds. I could probably go longer than that with this mount. I just haven't tried it. Gain 200. RGB exposures, I do 2 minutes. I know a lot of people say 60 seconds is better, but that's twice the amount of files that you have to find place to store, right? So I do 2 minutes. We don't have a big problem here with satellites interfering or lights, so there's really nothing to ruin, a longer frame. And then, of course, calibration frames. Do you all have any questions so far?
No, sounds good.
Okay, you're being easy on me here. Okay. And I'll just talk a little bit about my workflow without getting too far off into the woods. But this is basically my Galaxy workflow for RGB. I blink, of course, create a project. I use weighted batch pre-processing. I've not tried that new fast track one because my 18 hours of data processed in 3 hours. So I'm okay with that. And I know pretty much what I want to get. I usually get on Astrobin and I'll find a few pictures that I like of the target that I'm going to shoot and figure out, well, how much integration time do I think I'm going to need? So I'm not in a hurry to get it batch pre-processed. Then, of course, dynamic crop, channel combination. I've switched over to Graxpert. I think there are some even newer ones now that I have not tried. Color calibration, BlurX, NoiseX, StarX, stretch it, do some curves, saturation, and then add back in my stars, which I've processed very similarly to that. And there it is. And this is the formula that I use for adding my stars back in. I mentioned resources earlier, and that's one reason that I mentioned our club too, is because to me, imaging by myself is just kind of a recipe for frustration. I really need that interaction with other imagers to hear what they're doing, how they're solving problems. Organized star parties, that's where you get inspiration, meet new friends, and as I say there, find new ways to spend money on astronomy equipment, right? I mean, there's always going to be someone who has a newer camera or a faster refractor. But it's fun to dream. I have 3 friends in Dallas that I don't see in person anymore, but I do Zoom with them once a week. So it's just the 4 of us, and we just talk about our collection of data and our processing of the data. And we've gotten to the point where we go with our spouses and we meet at a dark site and do some imaging every now and then, which is fun. As far as online resources, I mean, I just can't say enough about these people. Adam Block, Patriot Astro, Queeve, SETI Astro. There are more. I'm sure you have your favorites. But I think making use of sources like that really enriches what you can do. Again, thank you all. Remember my 2 good pieces of advice there. And if you can come to Texas, we would love to have you. This is a picture from the El Dorado Star Party. That was the week where I had my little 8-inch setup here, and my friend presented me with that mount. This is the entrance to the ranch where that one is held. It's called the X-Bar Ranch. It's a 6th-generation Texas ranching family who own the ranch. And one of the ways that they've kept it running is by hosting events like this week-long Star Party. This is Okie-Tex up in the Panhandle, Burl 1. This year, we had about 4 times that many people there. We had 450 registrants this year. So RVs and tents were packed in. Everyone saw the forecast for 8 clear nights and just came to Oklahoma. It was truly legendary. This is Texas Star Party in the Davis Mountains, Portal 2. They're fighting the Bortle rating. It's from the fracking to the north. You can see a little bit of a light dome these days, but it's gotten better. The Star Party and the observatory are working with the oil companies to try to preserve these skies. This is the upper field. There are 3 fields. And this is the upper field, and I'm going to show you in a minute why you want to be on the upper field. But This is the exit. When you're leaving Texas Star Party, it says Vaya con Dios. But this is one of the reasons you go. This is Omega Centauri, and it rises over these mountains right here. There's a little dip right here. And about midnight, it rises in May enough that you can take a picture of it. But this is really the only object that I've ever photographed that looks better in the eyepiece. In my 8-inch SCT with a 25 millimeter eyepiece in there, it takes up almost the entire field of view. And it's just like nothing I've ever seen. It's, of course, our largest globular cluster. All I have, guys. Thank you all. You have any questions?
Well, that was a bit of an insight, wasn't it? The first thing I've got to ask you is, when you picked up that glass, was that clear bourbon or water?
Oh, it is water.
It is water. That's good. I was just a bit worried at your time of the afternoon, you see.
Dodie, I have a question. You mentioned Trevor Jones.
Yes.
Recently, his most recent video is of looking at his old data, which he captured with an SLR. Just wondering whether you ever, I mean, I've gone from Deep Sky Stacko in the early days to APP and now to PixInsight. I was just wondering if you tried to go back to your old data and tried these new techniques in PixInsight on the old data you took. For me, it's been really interesting.
I have, and can I stop sharing, or are we through with that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see you all. I did not watch that video yet of his, but I want to. I have done that. And that's one of the great things about PixInsight is you can combine with weighted batch preprocessing. You can combine frames from different telescopes, different cameras. It doesn't matter. If you have different exposure times, it will give you a master for each one. And so let's say you've got some 1 minute and some 2 minute exposures, then you can use the HDR combine process in PixInsight to combine those. And it's really a good thing because, you know, like with M42, for example, it keeps you from blowing out that core where the trapezium is. The same thing like with an Andromeda. It will keep you from blowing out that central core. So you have more definition in areas like that don't need as much, don't need a 2 minute exposure. But I have done that. It's been a while and I can't even think of a photo to show you, but it's not hard at all. Doing that was kind of what made me get a little bit more serious about my file management and keeping my frames. So you want to keep all of your original raw frames, and you want to keep at least the master for your flat frames. And then, you know, if you go in once a year or once every 2 years and take new bias frames and dark frames, you want to keep those original ones that you use to calibrate that old data with, so that when you combine them, and then so you have those to calibrate those old frames again. And then what I do in PixInsight is I create under the file name, let's say it's M31, under that file name, I have folders for each date of data collected. And I call it date underscore, and then you know, 10/15/2024. So I put all my data, light frames and calibration frames in there before I dump them into WBPP, and then click on keyword, and it will sort them. So it knows which flat frames to apply to which light frames. And then you'll get masters and combine them, and you can do that. That's the process that I used. So
Quite interesting on a similar topic. Quiv's latest video is about how you need to keep all your master frames, and is now storing everything on RAID drives because it obviously takes up so much space.
yeah.
And yeah, that's also a very good video. It's just been released.
Yeah. And that's one reason I don't want a full frame camera. Those files are 4 times the size
Yeah.
of my camera. So I'm always running up against my limit anyway and having to offload things. So the less of that, the better. Yeah, and then use those new techniques. Just the Blur X and Noise X and all that's worth it to run through them again.
I've got some questions for you. I only ever used CCD cameras up to this point. I've just purchased an ASI 533 mono camera, because I only worked. And I just was really disappointed with the results initially. But I was just looking at your figures there for the gain and the times length of your exposures, because and they're far. Well, I was trying to do it with my 3nm filters originally. I was getting barely anything. I was sort of fighting to get any image at all. I went back to my 7nm and I've got a lot more data. But I just see you using a much higher gain and offset than I've been using. So that's quite useful for me. So I shall try it. And you were doing something like 300 seconds exposure? Yeah, which I was doing only much shorter exposures as well.
I do 10 minutes.
Do you?
Yeah, 10-minute exposures.
Because I've worked
10 minutes.
with CCDs before, so and I was told I need to run such long exposures on the CMOS camera.
What was that last bit?
I've only used the CMOS camera. I've never used the CMOS camera before, so I've done 10 minutes on my CCD.
It's narrowband, by the way.
That's all narrowband. Yeah, that was a 3nm.
Right. And what is it about the images?
Well, when I started using the CMOS camera, I was getting hardly any data. It was just nothing there at all. So I stopped using 3nm and went back to my 7nm filters. And I got a bit more data, but I wasn't using such high gain as you. I was only set about 100.
Yeah.
And I don't remember what the offset was. And I wasn't doing such exposures either. I hadn't realised.
Right. Right. Try it. And I don't know, each camera has its own drop off there. If you look in the manual, online manual for your camera, they'll show a point at which the quantum efficiency just takes a nosedive.
Yeah.
And that's where you want to put it.
Okay.
And for mine on narrowband, it's 200, and then on 75 or 100. I've seen both on the 1600, but 75 seems to work best for me.
What, for
the RGB, for the color, yeah.
Yeah, I don't use color. I only do mono, so.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got like Plutus skies, it's just not worth it, is it?
Right. Filters, haven't you?
Yeah, RGB filters, yeah. Yeah, but I don't use a color camera, I only use a mono camera.
For resolution.
But I mean, on my 1600 mono, I run it at a gain of 75 on RGB.
Oh, right, yeah, on RGB. So,
right.
Yeah. And then 200 on narrowband.
Yes.
Okay.
200. Mhm.
One
With
thing,
an
sorry,
offset of, I'm sorry.
sorry, I'm interrupting you. One thing Martin said, which about offset. Now, I never put in any offset, and I know
Right.
some people do. Do you have an opinion on putting in a bit of offset?
I don't know the reasoning behind it. I don't know the technical reason, but I was just told you need some offset.
It stops the clipping, doesn't it? Black clipping.
Right.
Gives you some margin when you're processing.
Right.
Otherwise,
Do you put in some offset?
yeah.
You don't.
Otherwise, your black point could go right. You could show it right over to the left of the histogram.
Yeah.
And then when you start processing, now you start clipping it. So the idea is
Mhm.
shift it over on the histogram.
Yeah.
So you've got some room to play
Yeah.
with when you start processing.
Right. Right. So yeah, there's always something to be learned in this hobby. I think it's just a fun. It's challenging, and it keeps your mind sharp when you're not pulling your hair out. Yeah, it's a whole lot of fun.
Totally agree.
Do you all have any other questions I can answer? Try to answer?
Yeah, I did
Yes.
see much mention of focusing.
Okay.
Maybe I missed it.
Are you having a particular issue with focusing, or you just want to know how I manage it?
That's what I want to know. How do you go about
Okay.
your focusing?
Yeah, on each of my refractors, I have a ZWO EAF. They're a little bit of a pain to install. It's different on every telescope. But they really work very well. And then in Nina's setup, you tell it which focuser you're using. You tell it the ZWO, and you tell it, it knows it's 120 millimeters, I think, or 100 to 120 millimeters. And then I use the ZWO mini guide scope. It's the 120 mono is what I use for the guide scope. You asked me about focusing. Right? Not guiding. Nina works very, very well with the EAF. Once you get your settings straight. And what I do is I tell Nina to do an autofocus rerun every hour, or when the HFR changes by 10%. One of those two things happens as a trigger for a refocus. And it'll take about 3 minutes to run the autofocus routine. And I typically get an HFR of under 2. Unless the skies just aren't good, and then it might be 2.5. But with BlurX, it knocks that back down to where it's fine.
So
Yeah.
do you use the filter offset now for focusing in Nina?
I do use filter offsets, and it works very well in Nina with the sequences. And that saves you a little bit of time if you're and like a lot of times I'll just do a whole lot of red, and then I'll do a whole lot of blue, and then a whole lot of green, and then some hydrogen. But if you are doing like 10 of each or 20 of each, couple of minute exposures, it is very helpful to have the filter offset in your sequence. So it just moves that amount instead of going through the whole routine. Well, yeah. I think I've been promised an Italian dinner here, so I'm going to.
Yeah.
We're on the next flight over.
Really, if you can come to Texas, let me know, and we'd love to show you our darker skies here.
You could actually regret that.
We'll be over at the weekend.
Oh, no, we like to do things big here in Texas, so you would all be welcome. So thank you all again. This is just a pleasure. Thank you.